Hi, everyone. Welcome to MassBio's weekly town hall with President and CEO Bob Coughlin. I'm Jennifer Nason, Senior Director of Communications for MassBio, and we're thrilled to have with us today Rachel Sha, who's Vice President of Digital Business Development and Licensing at Sanofi, who's here to share some insights with us around the digital transformation at Sanofi and across the industry. Welcome, Rachel. Welcome, Bob. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jenny. It's great to be back. And Rachel, welcome to the MassBio Town Hall. It's good to be back, starting up with our fall series. I hate to say that, but the summer is coming to an end, and Labor Day is past. We hope everybody had a wonderful Labor Day weekend, but we're back to business now here at MassBio, and welcome all to the MassBio Hub as well.
Great. Thank you, Bob. And everyone, just a bit of housekeeping. As always, we want this to be an interactive discussion. So we're streaming on YouTube today, so you can use the live chat function, ask questions throughout, and we'll get to as many as we can. So Rachel, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. Really excited to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to connect with you and the broader community.
Absolutely. And for those who have seen some of our programming, I mean, MassBio has been talking about digital health for a while now, talking about sort of the convergence of digital health and the life sciences and the opportunities this presents for patients and the delivery of care. So we could start off just talking a little bit about how the life sciences industry is currently using technology to improve outcomes. Bob, maybe you can start, and then Rachel, I'd love for you to weigh in.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. And to all of you in the audience today, you know that the discussion and the topic of digital health isn't new to us here at MassBio, and it's certainly not new to our cluster here in Massachusetts. And I think it's important to note that as we talk about how we focus on what's next, digital health is a big piece of that. You know, people often say, how did Massachusetts become one of the best places in the world for the life sciences industry? I mean, I would argue we have all the ingredients here, but we've always focused on what's next. We weren't making Me Too drugs that, treat the symptoms of disease. We've always been focusing on, cell and gene therapy and regenerative medicine, and in many cases, drugs that treat the underlying cause of disease, and in some cases cure disease. That's how we stayed on topic of what's next. Well, digital health is a big piece of that. As we move forward, if we don't continue to use digital technology to get better at what we do and to show better outcomes for patients, we're not going to stay on top. Places like California will beat us to the punch on that. We don't want that to happen. And where we educate so many people in the high tech space and so many people in the life tech space, why not converge the two together? And that's what the topic today is going to be all about. And we're fortunate to have somebody like Rachel join us from an amazing company like Sanofi to talk about what industry is doing so that we can capitalize on that and ultimately help patients, because that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. And Rachel, from your perspective, I mean, tell us a little bit about, how you see the industry using technology right now.
Well, I think Bob sort of set the right context. I mean, I think at Sanofi, we're thinking about digital in two broad categories. The first is, how can we use technology to transform operationally what do we do? Research and development, sales and marketing, medical market access, manufacturing. Operationally, these are all ripe areas for transformation, for us to improve probability of success, to improve the results, maybe at a cheaper cost and maybe faster. So these are definitely ways to think about kind of transforming life sciences industry. The other area that Sanofi has been very active in is in the area of digital health and thinking about technology services and solutions to improve patient outcomes. They could be solutions that we offer directly to patients, or they could be solutions that we provide to providers or to payers to help them manage diseases with the best of information and technology and the understanding of science and biology sort of at their fingertips. And so in both of those areas, Sanofi's been quite involved in investing in transforming and integrating technology and new capabilities into what we do.
Rachel, could you talk a little bit more about how our industry is adopting digital technologies for clinical trials? We talk about diversity and inclusion as it relates to clinical trials and making the population of our clinical trials look more like the patient population that we want to serve? Is there a way that digital health can help us communicate with patients and collect data?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much opportunity within clinical development in particular in terms of technology. So one of the areas that you touched on, one of the benefits of that is certainly improving diversity. I think one of the things when the classical model of clinical trials where you have a PI who recruits patients more or less within a certain geographic area, you're relying on that individual to identify those patients, and they're making a decision perhaps based on whether or not they believe that patient will come back, they will participate over the duration of the study, and factors like what's their job situation, what's their home situation, and other unintended biases may come into play as to why patients end up getting recruited into patients. And in this new space, you could think about, well, can we recruit patients not limited based on their geography, right? Can you use online recruiting methods? And then can you transform parts or all of studies so that they take place in the comfort of a patient's home, as opposed to relying on the physician's office as the primary site where the trial takes place? And I think that opens up the doors for who can participate, depending on whatever the constraints or whatever the issues are. So there's certainly an aspect of diversity that's quite interesting, and that has been appealing to us. I think there's other aspects as well, where it allows us to maybe use real world evidence to stratify patients and to see what kinds of patients would be able to participate in a study depending on certain inclusion exclusion criteria. So there's also analytical ways that we can add to the design of clinical trials to predict what kind of recruitment will result, the productivity, and even potentially results depending on the data that exists. So the space of development certainly is very active in terms of digital transformation. And it's one that we've been investing pretty significantly, whether it be through these virtual study methods, novel patient recruitment methods, patient stratifications, even things like biomarkers, and using them as surrogate endpoints, secondary or potentially in the future even primary endpoints. These are all ways that we can improve the development process and shorten the timelines, increase the participation.
Absolutely. I mean, Bob, you know that well just from going through clinical trials, with Bobby. It is really a way to make them more accessible. I mean, you really do need resources to be able to participate. So I think that's a wonderful point. You also brought up real world data. We've tried to focus on that a lot, both for finding new indications, but also determining access to therapies. So I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about kind of how real world data is currently being used to inform regulatory issues, and then how you envision this changing over the next few years.
Well, I think the space of real world evidence and real world data has really blossomed in the last couple of years, and it's been an area that we've been very active in partnering, either to gain access to novel data sets or to gain access and to work with people with interesting advanced analytics, whether it be machine learning, AI, or other kinds of techniques. And I think certainly in the regulatory process, there have been a number of ways where real world evidence could supplement the efforts of a clinical trial, right? So some of the areas where we first started as an industry certainly is in the area of oncology and thinking about sort of synthetic control arms, and using basically real world evidence to kind of model out what controls could be, right? And using that maybe to supplement or to complement an existing ongoing study effort. But there are lower risk ways to also use real world evidence, because some people think, wow, that's kind of a really big leap to take that step. And there are everyday things that you can do to use real world evidence to improve your development processes, right? So again, areas where designing protocols, trying to identify where patients are in terms of the diagnostic journey, and targeting those areas to diagnose and recruit those patients into studies. That's all relying on oftentimes real world evidence. Um, so there are a number of different ways that we can use real world evidence in that process. In the future, I think I should also say outside of the US, we've also started to be able to use evidence from different parts of the world as part of an overall package, right, to provide to regulatory authorities to enable decision making. But over time, you talk to some of our regulatory leaders and experts in the space. The ambition is to even transform the data sets and the processes that FDA or other bodies go through, so that rather than doing a snapshot of one study at one moment in time, here's the results, maybe we can move to a model where um, you know authorities are able to see real time how that data is progressing over time, and maybe you can progressively um, uh, expand access and approvals of medication based on what the evidence shows. But that's not necessarily today, but that's certainly some of the strategy and ambition of some of the regulatory leaders that we work with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know the FDA has been very focused on that. And I think from our standpoint, we've been really focused around real world data. I always get a tongue twister if I say that.
Real world data.
Real world data for access, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
talk a lot at MassBio about kind of the need for value-based arrangements, but data to actually demonstrate improved outcomes and cost avoided, right?
Yeah.
Bob, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and when you think of, we don't have a healthcare system. We have a sick care system, okay? And we have an industry right now that has innovated so rapidly that our payers haven't kept up with they haven't innovated the way we have in drug discovery. And by saying a sick care system, I mean that we have payers that are designed to pay for a recurring long-term chronic therapy. And we have an industry now that is inventing breakthrough therapies that change the course of disease and in some case cure disease. Well, that's going to have a large upfront cost, and we don't have a system that will measure costs avoided. So one of the things that I get so excited about when we talk about real world data, real world evidence, how can we truly track the benefits to the patient outside of what we measured for traditional endpoints in a clinical trial? Okay, use cystic fibrosis as an example. The endpoints are increased, pulmonary function test. Well, that's great, but is anybody going to measure the fact that that patient isn't in the hospital for cleanouts constantly, their lung, all the other costs associated with wellness, right? We want people to be well. There's no way to save money in our healthcare system more than by keeping people well, healthy, out of the hospital, working. There's other therapies that people can wean off of. So if you look at a cystic fibrosis patient that could have cost $500,000 a year over year as they got sicker and sicker, you're saving money by putting them on a breakthrough therapy. And we haven't had the ability to track that data. If we don't use technology to be able to track, no one else is going to do it for us, right? We need to do it. So, I mean, that's one exciting thing. We need data to build the new real healthcare system. And it's our job at MassBio to make sure that the ecosystem is in place and healthy so that the world keeps up with the innovation that we're experiencing from the amazing people that go to work each and every day at our member companies. And another thing I'd like to add too, to think of how real world data can be used to find new indications for drugs which can benefit more patients, right? Without having to go through lengthy and expensive clinical trials. So the way I look at it, any way we can use technology to do things quicker, better, faster. People always say drugs are too expensive. I don't say they're too expensive. I say they cost too much to invent, right? So if we can invent these drugs quicker, cheaper, faster, with the same level of safety and efficacy, the costs to the end user is going to be less. So again, I get a little excited about this, but
I mean,
really...
such great points, because label expansion is definitely like low-hanging fruit. That's just data that we're all sitting on to see where therapies that are already approved, where they're seeing benefit, and which kinds of patients can benefit further from that if we expanded that label. So completely agree with you. And in the area of measuring the impact and the value of our therapies, what do they do for patients? I think historically we've also classically used EHR claims data because that's the data that we have available. But
Hmm.
really, the biggest impacts to patients are sometimes in the real world. How are they living? How are they faring? And that disease burden is not necessarily fully captured in just the EHR and claims data. So some of the ways to kind of capture other biomarkers, whether they be digital biomarkers through wearables or through other means of capturing the disease impact on a day-to-day life, I think that's when you really start to get the full picture of the impact of the disease and the impact of a therapy on a patient and their everyday life. And that's ultimately what patients want to do, is to get back to life and to do what they want to do, as opposed to having to work through a certain protocol and a certain way of managing their disease.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sometimes we can forget about quality of life of the patient, right? And that's why we're so excited that, not only has digital health come a long way in the last 4 or 5 years, look at how far we've come with patient advocacy as well, and engaging the patient in the process and putting them in the middle of the process. And, 21st Century Cures is a perfect example of that. So these are all great, great, wonderful things.
Absolutely. And I think we've touched upon a lot of different ways that biopharma companies can capitalize on these digital technologies. I think what we're hearing, a big broad swath of our membership is those small to medium-sized biotechs. And I think, those companies with fewer resources are really wondering, where do I even start when it comes to trying to adopt some of the digital health and digital technologies, either into the drug discovery process or their clinical trials? So I'm just wondering, Rachel, can you share some insight either around, how Sanofi has gone about trying to embed digital technologies, maybe in a simpler kind of use case? And then kind of what is your advice to those companies who really want to start testing the waters of digital health, but just aren't sure, where to start?
So great questions. Honestly, we've been on a transformation journey for many, many years, and our earliest efforts were really pretty organic and grassroots, and a series of individual experiments just to kind of understand what is this that we're talking about when we talk about digital, and how can we incorporate that or transform what we're doing. And so really the first 2 years of our efforts, I would say back in 2015-16, was a bit more experimental, a bit more exploratory. And over time, it's become more and more clear to us specifically which use cases, like exactly what business problems do we want to solve, and where is technology, or where is certain technology most appropriate, most relevant. And so we've been able to be both, more strategic and more operational from that perspective. And our earliest efforts, we actually did start in the clinical development space. One of the first relationships that we struck was with a company called Science 37 in the space of distributed studies, for exactly the reasons that we talked about. And I would say, where to start? Honestly, I think a lot of people get enamored by technology, and they feel like I really want to use AI without really consideration, like, what is it that you're trying to do? What's the problem? Is it an internal problem? Is it a patient problem? What's the problem that you're trying to solve? And then secondarily, how does technology best solve that problem? And then, what are the companies or what are the partners? Could be startups, could be large tech companies, could be academia, could be even payers and providers who are also innovating in the space. But everybody brings a different set of capabilities, and more than anything else, how to incorporate digital into what you do operationally isn't just about a technology integration, right? It's as much about thinking about how do you change your process, what kinds of new capabilities do you need to bring into your workforce, what kinds of upskilling efforts, training efforts, cultural changes, decision-making changes do you have to make in order to integrate technology into what you do, or into new capabilities into what you do. That, I think, sometimes is the part that people underestimate and come to as a second step, when in reality, if you thought about it at the outset, then I think people would be a little bit more conscious of thinking about, if this one experiment, if this pilot worked, how do I now scale it across my project, or scale it across my efforts? For small biotechs that are just starting, I would say, focus on where you think shortening time, decreasing cost, increasing probability of success, whether it be on the discovery side, on a trial design, on trial execution. If you're lucky enough to be close to go to market and commercializing therapies, there's a lot to do on the commercialization space. But think about where you're going to have the biggest pain points, and then apply the technology to that pain point. Hopefully that helps.
No, that's great advice. I think that's really relevant for a lot of our members and relevant to, approaching any problem, right? So I think we've been talking a lot about how COVID is accelerating, the adoption of these digital technologies because we've been forced to. We've been forced to adopt, to basically manage our businesses virtually. We've been forced to interact with patients virtually, clients virtually, do our business online, without that face-to-face interaction. So I'm wondering if you can both talk a little bit about the impacts of COVID on the overall digital health landscape and the development of medicines. And maybe Bob, you could start.
Yeah, well, when you think of Operation Warp Speed, right? I mean, I was saying earlier before we went live that I wish there was a warp speed for cancer and for cystic fibrosis and all the other stuff, because when you look at the 85 companies in Massachusetts that are doing COVID related research and development, as it pertains to diagnostics, therapeutics and vaccines, et cetera. I mean, there's no place in the world that's doing more of it than we are right here in Massachusetts, which is amazing. And to see the collaboration amongst these companies and at all levels is truly extraordinary. And I think that, I don't think any of us ever anticipated that the most important thing to the world's economy and all of us feeling safe and being able to go back to our regular lives would depend on a vaccine. I don't think any of us anticipated it. But I do think that after we go through this exercise, from what I've seen, not just the 13 years I've been here at MassBio, but the 18 years that I've been involved with drug discovery, I've never seen cooperation like this and collaboration like this. And we're going to be better. And I think we come out the other side of this pandemic as a much better, stronger, efficient, effective industry. And that's awesome because that's good for sick people no matter what the indication is. When you look at where digital health has fit into that, Rachel, you talked about it, AI, right? Think how we can use artificial intelligence as opposed to the day and age, the old days when you had these huge campuses doing high throughput screening, just trying to get a hit. Right? Different world now. Even when you look at like single batch manufacturing, when we get to the point to manufacture this stuff, it's not just big plants that can only make one certain drug, right? We're so much better by using technology. I mean, we have here in Massachusetts, one of your facilities is the first completely digitally automated manufacturing facility in the world, right? That's amazing stuff, amazing stuff. So I just think that we've embraced digital health. We've embraced technology. We need to continue to do that so that we can get through this pandemic and then move back and continue to fight all unmet medical need. And you also made another point too, Rachel, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say something somewhat nice about payers, because I don't do that often. When you look at how some of the payers and providers are partnering with us to make sure that we have all the information we need. Companies like Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, I mean, they've got more value-based arrangements under their belt than I think any other insurer or payer in the country. And we do work very closely with them. And we need to continue to do that because if the payers, providers, and innovators, meaning our industry, don't continue to work together, we're not going to turn that sick care system into a healthcare system. And if we don't do that, there's no sense in inventing these amazing breakthrough therapies because if patients can't access them, what good is it, right? So these are the things that we're going to continue to work on. I don't know if I answered a question right there, but I got on a roll. So thank you.
I think you did. Rachel, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
I mean, maybe just to add to some of the points that you raised, I think, COVID really shown the world that pharma can be agile. It doesn't have to be an 8 to 10 year, development process. And in fact, just thinking about standing up clinical trials and the COVID studies in particular, those were designed and operationalized in a matter of a few weeks. That's unheard of in the drug development space, and the same for scaling up manufacturing efforts and the list goes on. So I think COVID's definitely shown that we can all be agile. That when we have this renewed purpose, that we can focus on the most important activities. And in particular, in the area of digital health, I think it's done a number of things. I think if you're a skeptic as to whether or not digital health was just a fad or if it could really transform the space, I think it's shown that in this space where patients can't access their physicians on in the same way that they had in the past, that telemedicine, for example, has bridged that gap, that patients can access their physicians, and that for non-acute issues, they can be resolved through telemedicine visits. And so it's really filled a gap of access to care. I think it's also shown to us an area that Sanofi is also quite active in is an ability to actually provide care to patients, to manage chronic diseases in particular remotely, right? So what can we do to support diabetic patients, particularly if they're not able to see their physicians, or for patients who are being treated by specialists and maybe can't see their specialists? What are ways that they can access their physicians to get prescription refills, for example? So, a lot of our early efforts were figuring out how do we minimize disruption, ensure that patients get their therapies, and ensure that they get access to care. And as time has progressed, we've expanded our efforts and thoughts around how do we continue to provide care, give patients enough tools to enable sort of self-management, and then where necessary, connect them to their physicians to ensure that they get the right care to manage their diseases. So COVID's definitely had a very accelerated effect on digital adoption and an awareness that this can be a very important tool to transform both of our sectors, life sciences and healthcare.
Absolutely. And I love that focus on kind of empowering the patient. I think you couldn't have said that better. And this is a discussion that we're going to continue, over the next few months, over the next few years, to continue to try to increase collaboration between the life sciences and some of these, digital technology innovators. So we hope, I can't believe we're already almost at time, but we hope everyone does join us. We are going to continue this critical conversation at our Digital Health Impact Conference, which Rachel spoke at last year. So please join us on September 30th. We're going to bring together some wonderful speakers to continue, again, this conversation on how we can improve patient outcomes. You may have noticed we also are going to continue our town hall series. It's going to be bi-monthly moving forward. So please join us. We're going to have some great guests throughout the rest of the fall. We're going to welcome Abby Selniker, who's a former chair of MassBio and also a partner at Third Rock, on September 22nd. So, Rachel, Bob, thank you so much for sharing your insights, for, helping our members understand, how they can capitalize on some of these digital technologies. And Rachel, I don't know if you have any kind of last thoughts or parting words before we wrap up.
Well, just want to say thank you again for the invitation to connect with you guys. This is a time for a lot of really creative problem solving because we have a lot of problems in the world. And so we look forward to collaborating with all of you on solving these big health issues. So I think technology is going to play an important role in solving that in many different facets of it. So look forward to partnering with the space.
Well said. Thank you, Bob, for joining us always.
Thank you. And thank you, Rachel. Thank you for all that you do for patients. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
and to
everyone.
all of you, have a wonderful, wonderful week.
Perfect. We hope to see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.